Well, good evening, Jeffrey and Clayton. I'm very honored for you to join me here tonight. And just to give our audience a sense, I'd like to give a brief introduction. Jeffrey, you focused on creating a high consciousness culture in your business, which parallels your own personal journey. And you're the co-owner of 2 manufacturing businesses, including one that's been in business since 1835. Focused Life Force Energy then is a confluence of your manufacturing, engineering, business, and spiritual evolution, correct?
Yes, very much so.
Well, welcome. And Clayton, you've worked in education and training and coaching for over 30 years. So for the last 20 years, you have focused on business as your spiritual path in your coaching practice. Since discovering consciousness kinesiology in 2004, I've discovered that you have completed over 5 million consciousness kinesiology calibrations, as well as creating a number of consciousness assessments and several unique energy medicine protocols. Welcome to both of you. I'm most honored to have your company with me today.
Thank you, Rita.
You both come from seemingly different backgrounds on the surface, but we always know that the surface deceives, right? I suspect there's a common thread here. How did you find yourself on this journey of working with Focused Life Force Energy? Shall I address that to you, Clayton?
Sure. Jeff usually goes first, so I'm like always waiting. So this is good. We're mixing it up today. So I had a coaching practice where I focused on business as a spiritual path. That was my unique selling proposition. I think that's what I was told I was supposed to have.
Okay.
I'd spent 11 years in an Eastern-based philosophy, working for, simply studying, but I was working for private schools and educational organizations. And so I married or I put together my interest in philosophy, where I thought the power in the world was at the time, and it seems that the power in the world is still in business. It seems that business, for better or for worse, has a significant amount of power on the planet, perhaps the most significant. It depends how you measure it. But so I wanted to go where I could do the most amount of good. And so I decided to work with business people who considered their business their spiritual path. So I started a coaching practice in that area. And as I left the education, part of the education field. And I worked with a friend in Vancouver. His name was Jim. And Jim had a practice. A lot of us coaches knew each other. We were the old timers. We got into coaching back in the mid-90s when it's just nobody even knew about it back then, and we went to different schools together. And so Jim had been working with Jeff in his company, and there came a time when Jim thought that he should introduce Jeff and I, because I had these different assessments where I could measure people's consciousness in different ways. One of the things that I learned about business people is if you don't measure things, you can't manage them properly. So they really appreciate being able to measure, measure things. And consciousness is a natural part of that. And so I did an assessment with Jeff, and we became friends. And we'll let Jeff finish the story.
Excellent. Yes, Jeff, take it from there.
Well, I did really appreciate in meeting Clayton his ability to measure using kinesiology consciousness. And so I became introduced to Dr. Hawkins' work and fields of consciousness and really how it played out in my own being, in my own life, my day-to-day life. So as Clayton was coaching me, we were looking at different areas of my life, and there would be a low spot. And he would, using that tool, sort of identify something that I wasn't consciously aware of, or I didn't think anybody else was aware of, for sure. And then it gave me a place to work and began to grow myself by using energetic medicine techniques on that area to grow the level of consciousness. So in that process, I became very comfortable with Clayton's ability to test, to measure the level of consciousness, and also to zero in through his intuitive skills into the areas where I needed help, or where the growth was, the most possible and fruitful. So during that time of really appreciating that skill, we became introduced to this inventor in BC. And I was working with a young boy in Cincinnati whose parents had found me through a oneness meditation list. And he had some brain cancer. And so Clayton had mentioned that he had his own challenges, health challenges at times, and that he had found this inventor and this energy that was happening there with this invention. So I had to go up and see it. And it was just an amazing experience walking into this house. It was just full of what was the original FLFE machine. Floor to ceiling stacks of plates and coils and spheres. It was just a wild scene walking in there, and it was a typical inventor's place. There's like tools all over the place and oscilloscopes going and crackling electricity. It was like going into Nikola Tesla's lab.
Oh my goodness.
And my hair was just sort of standing up, like just felt electrified, but it was consciousness. It was high consciousness that I was feeling, and I really hadn't had that experience of a high field like that. And for instance, when we went to lunch, I noticed the effect it had on me, that it kind of extended through walking down the street to lunch. Everyone in the restaurant looked beautiful, and I could just see their story, their life and how amazing it was. And so that experience of a high consciousness field, the effect on my own consciousness, that was really the start of FLFE. And we started taking, parts of the machine, building our own network, building on that into its own system that it is today. Really started in that first visit.
That's wonderful. It's the first time I hear this part of the story. And it's also interesting that you felt the effects of this high consciousness field almost immediately. You could tell by the changes in the environment around you and your response to the environment, correct?
That and I did feel it in my body. And at that time, I wasn't particularly sensitive, I didn't think, to Reiki and other things that people would do with me. But I could really feel an uplifting or a feeling of lightness and light in my body.
Yes.
But yes, even leaving that field, I was in that state, that high state.
Which is wonderful. So you alluded to the sense, to the topic of consciousness. Perhaps you can give us a bit of a definition of how you would describe the nature of consciousness.
Pass that to you, Clayton.
I was hoping you were going to answer that one, because I'm not sure that I have the answer that is the highest truth, but I would describe consciousness as life. When there is no life, there is a different type of consciousness. But I would say certainly an aspect of consciousness is life. Of course, we're familiar with how it grows within us and changes, and I'm sure we'll talk about Dr. Hawkins' work and his map of consciousness. So I don't think it's a static energy, or it's no one's possession, as much as we like to possess things. I think we have a relationship with it and it with us.
And perhaps even a relationship beyond us, what Nancy McTaggart calls the field of non-local awareness, right? consciousness is that interface for us with that larger field.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's an interesting topic. It's sometimes I haven't really thought to answer it like that. I was looking at the notes earlier and I thought, oh, I don't know how this is going to get answered.
Oh, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there.
No, it's okay. It's a good question.
I think you can get an answer from anybody you ask, and it will be slightly different because it also relates to our personal subjective experience of the field and of life force, which is going to be uniquely experienced in our personal way, differently perhaps from the person next to us, right?
Yes, it is very subjective. It's certainly a quality of intelligence. I would say that's a pretty good description of it. And sometimes giving an answer like this, or looking for an answer, it's easier to describe our relationship to it. Sometimes it's easier to describe what it isn't in some cases. Some definitions, even though they're accurate, if they're not socially, contextually appropriate for our culture, using the language of our time and using metaphors from the current day-to-day life that we're living at this time in the world, it's hard for people to relate. So we'll tend not to try to go too technical with things. We'll try to make it just down to earth. And consciousness is your loving pet or your loving dog wagging its tail, or your cat purring to that's an aspect of consciousness. It's a loving
Absolutely.
aspect.
Yes. Yeah. And it's also an energetic aspect of consciousness, correct? Because consciousness is very much energetic, even though we see the effects of it. It's like love. It's an energy, but you see the effects of it when you look around, right?
That's the higher aspect, yes.
Yes,
There's
yes.
the lower stuff too. We see the intolerance and the bigotry and the anger.
Correct. So maybe Jeff, you can jump in and just give us a brief outlay of Dr. Hawkins' map of consciousness, unless you kick the ball back to Clayten, just so we have the lay of the land of the map of consciousness that predicated this work.
Sure. So in Dr. Hawkins' work, he needed a way to describe these fields of consciousness that he was experiencing and that he was beginning to measure. And so this map is a logarithmic scale. So each point upwards is 10 times more energy available. So that comes back to the energetic statement you just made. There's more energy available in a high consciousness environment, and less energy in lower consciousness environments. So I'm speaking about environments here. It also applies to people, things, animals. It's a field that's generated, like I experienced in the inventor's place, and experienced since, in monasteries or chapels or, old prisons or battlefields where there's a much lower field and that dense, heavy feeling. So on the Hawkins map, 200 is where things become positive or moving towards hope, towards, the positive scale. And below that is where the lower emotions are. You can have addiction and fear and anger and depression and just these lower emotions, which describe that heavy feeling that you might feel, say, if you're in an old battlefield where there was a lot of death and destruction and suffering of some kind, or any place like that may hold that energy. And as we've seen through our work with FLFE, a place holds energy, holds memory or that level of consciousness there, and the crystalline structure of the rocks or the concrete or the drywall. And so that field of energy can remain somewhere, and that's why part of FLFE is clearing the old negative history and then bringing in the higher consciousness energy, activating the field that way. So then as you go up the scale, like North America is in the 410 to 420 range on this. It's sort of logical thinking, science, materialism, And as you go further up at 500, you're moving into the field of love. So, 540, 560 in that area of unconditional love. So that energy of unconditional love, when you're feeling that in your heart, when you're being with someone who's unconditionally loving you, like a pet that Clayton mentioned, there's an unconditional love there. And then in 600, you're starting into the non-linear realms where things start to happen that are, not in our normal materialistic scientific worldview, where synchronicities and cities which are described in some of the Eastern traditions of manifestation events and that kind of thing. And then as you get, and again, each point is 10 times higher. So from 420 to 421, 10 times more energy. And so you've got this logarithmic increase in energy. And then 1,000, the scale goes to infinity, really to creator, to all that is, however you conceive it. And then 1,000 in the human realm. It seems they will, ignite in burst of flames if we get much above that. But there's the human system, can only handle so much energy, the nervous system. And so that's something we've seen and we talk about in some of our webinars about building that up through nutrition, and our bodies build that capacity to carry the energy, the light.
I remember reading about the Buddha who mentioned that when he was approaching enlightenment, his nervous system was so taxed that he felt as if he was being torn limb from limb because he didn't have access to nutritional support such as magnesium or omega-3s. And so it's a very real phenomenon. But as human beings, clearly we are experiencing, we have access to the full range of human emotion, the good, bad, and ugly, right? So then we probably need to make a distinction between objective levels of consciousness and our integrated level of consciousness, correct?
I'll pass that back to Clayton.
Yeah, I knew you're going to toss that over.
Sure. When you say objective levels and integrated levels, can you say more about that? We have some language that we use where we make a distinction between level of consciousness and integrated level, but I'm not sure what you mean by objective.
Yes, that's what I mean. It's not a subjective, it's just the level of consciousness, but we don't necessarily hang out, let's say in anger, we may experience anger, but it flows through, and we don't necessarily hang out there because our integrated level of consciousness may be at a different place, correct?
Absolutely. So one of the things that you'll discover as you get good at kinesiology is that you are typically best to measure your consciousness over a period of time. If you don't measure your consciousness over a designated period of time, then the calibration will default to your level of consciousness in the moment.
Correct.
So if you are only measuring your level of consciousness after you meditate, or if you're in a workshop, or if you've just received a Reiki treatment or some type of therapy, then you're in a very high state. Now, the integrated level is the level you don't go below 98% of the time. And we typically, that's a subjective unit of measurement that we created to help us understand where we live as opposed to where we visit. We might visit anger for a moment. We might visit ecstasy for a moment. And when we're measuring it, when I'm doing an assessment, I typically would measure it over the previous week. But you can choose any length of time you want. It just helps you understand where that person lives as opposed to where they're visiting in the moment that you're measuring them.
Okay. That really, I think, clarifies the concept, because otherwise it can sometimes appear as if the map is very linear. And I sometimes explain to clients that the work we do, the heart of personal growth and evolution and consciousness, is a little bit like a snail. So the bulk of our consciousness is at what you would refer to as your integrated level. but we may have some trailing woundedness, a little tail coming behind, which we need to address and heal. And then we have areas where we're probing into higher levels of consciousness already as we grow. But what you refer to as that integrated level is really where we live, right? Is where the lost snail's house is. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so when you get into measuring people in different aspects of their life, like if you have a definition for personal development and then health, like in the assessment that I've created, we have 10 areas: personal development, health, sexuality, income, ability to receive, career, life's work, intent towards creation, social relationship, and lifestyle. And you create a definition for those, and then you measure the person over a period of time. Then you measure their integrated level, and then you measure their functioning capability, which is their ability to act on the context that they have.
Yeah.
Then you start to get a map of the mind.
Yes.
And it's a much more granular understanding of who we are as a person and where it is to do our work. You can also measure something called the critical factor, where you can put the least amount of effort in and get the most amount of gain. And then that's typically the area that you want to focus your efforts on.
I love that part about how you approach things, because it is so detailed and you really slice and dice it from various layers. And I believe that when we do that, we really access truth. Whereas if we just take one stab at it, we may miss some pieces. And this gives you a much more comprehensive perspective of truth. So let me ask you this. Then you see where people are at, and you can tell with consciousness kinesiology where the weakest links are. What is the main limitation as you see it to our evolution in consciousness?
Well, I'll let Jeff take a stab at this one, and then I'll pick it up for sure.
I'll start. Well, that's an interesting question. And it differs, of course, from individual to individual.
Yeah.
But one of the things we found as we began developing FLFE in the field of consciousness that it activates, and the level of consciousness in which we set that field in support of people's evolution. And that's the whole purpose of FLFE, is supporting the evolution of consciousness. Is what are the limiting factors? So, and for a company and for the two of us that are committed to the evolution of consciousness, we do talk about health. And we have programs within FLFE that are related to health. Programs being the sort of the specifications of the field, the information that's in the activated field of consciousness. And one of the things we discovered in testing was that health can be a limiting factor for rising in consciousness.
Absolutely.
And
I can see that.
Yes, in particular, the filtering organs, the liver and kidneys, because so much of consciousness, rising in consciousness and evolution on our path is physical. And we tend to think of it as mental, but there's changes in our body that are happening, evolution of our body. And our filtering organs are an important part of, filtering out those byproducts of the growth.
I see that in the clinic regularly when I work with people, and there will be some level of detoxification going on at the physical level, even though the issue that had been addressed was emotional. So that clearly is a big part of it. And then would it be accurate to say that most of the prevailing levels of consciousness, perhaps not all of them, below 200 are really under the jurisdiction of the ego, which would be a major limiting force there for the evolution of the individual consciousness?
Yeah, I would say that, in fact, if we sort of look at the sub 200 perspective, or just around 200, and then we look at the 400 perspective, and then we'll say a 590 plus perspective. As Jeff was saying, if you do this assessment and you calibrate the critical factor where you can put the least amount of effort in and get the most amount of gain, for people that are over 590 in the world, it's the nervous system. There's so few people in history of humanity that have been enlightened that our nervous systems aren't adapted to those high fields. So that's why we talk a lot about the nutrification in FLFE,
Yes.
about the essential fatty acids and magnesium,
Uh-huh.
because the critical factor in the nervous system is the myelin sheath. And so if you look, if you do research on how to feed the myelin sheath, it's EFAs and magnesium.
And those are the very areas that are under attack in our society at the moment with EMFs, radio frequencies, Wi-Fi, 5G. And so that's, but it is exciting because we have the knowledge, we have the tools, and we have the ability to do that. Where there is a will now, we can find a way to support that evolution in consciousness, right? And then that brings up another question. Evolving in consciousness is not a one-way street, right? We evolve based by the choices that we make, so that we can make lesser choices that will over time result in perhaps lesser consciousness. Whereas if we consistently choose to be aligned with our divine guidance, we can continue to evolve. I remember how surprised I was listening to Dr. Hawkins explaining how the Prophet Muhammad had been at a very high level of consciousness and then later in life developed frontal lobe epilepsy, and his level of consciousness dropped down significantly because of that physical condition that he had developed. So human choice is still free, right? And we can evolve or we can devolve.
And even if we're evolving, it's not always, it might look like this over years, but it's kind of like this, right?
There you go.
And oftentimes there's a breakdown before there's a breakthrough. I mean, we've all struggled with things.
Yes.
And,
yes.
you know,
Talk to me about that. Maybe, Jeffrey, you can talk about that. Bench time. You know what I mean?
Yes.
When you've had, I've just had a bit of bench time, because it seems sometimes as if we end up having to spend time on the sidelines for various reasons, right? Yeah.
Yeah, again, I mean, there's a physical component, and there's emotional components as well as the mind and, you know, spiritual components. So, you know, as we're moving and perhaps forgiving things in our past, or, you know, healing traumas that we've had, and we are moving up in consciousness. So now we're moving more energy, in our nervous system, you know, is maybe taxed. And that can put people on the sidelines. Just their nervous system needs time to adjust. Now, we found that, you know, the more EFAs and magnesium that you're taking, the faster that can happen. But if you're not doing that, that could put you on the sidelines a bit.
Yes.
But you know, as we've seen in other levels of consciousness maps, like spiral dynamics, they also notice and talk about that breakdown period, where your old beliefs that served you well at that place you've been begin to not work as well, or not work at all. And there's a certain death that's occurring of that old self, of those old beliefs. And in that old death, maybe there's some of those facades that kept the anger or the other things down now break apart, and there's that kind of breakdown period where I don't know what's true, I don't know who I am. And Dark Night of the Soul is kind of another way of describing it, which also can be seen as you're rebooting, or you're recalibrating to connect at a higher level.
Correct.
So
and
at
it
a
could
higher
feel
level,
like a no man's land, right? Where you sort of left behind that where you no longer are, and that you cannot return to, and yet that which is ahead is not yet firm and clear, and the infrastructure, physiologically, nervous system-wise, spiritually perhaps, is not yet fully developed for you to move forward.
Yeah, on the spiritual side, it might be how you connect, you know, how you connect to divinity in your own personal way that suddenly it doesn't seem to be working. And it's because you're moving to connect on a higher level, perhaps, as you move to these higher levels of consciousness. So you've got the physical, spiritual, and then you've got your friends and family who suddenly don't understand you, or you don't want to be around them so much. So that falls away. So you have the whole social aspect of it as well that can cause you to withdraw and be on the sidelines, as you say.
So it is a very real phenomenon, and I think that so often in our Western society, with its emphasis on performance, people feel perhaps shy to talk about that, and that is exactly one of the areas where the FLFE field can be such a wonderful to just provide an environment of high energy in which the person can sort of emerge from the tunnel, find their way, and get some traction again in their journey, right?
Yeah, that support, that level of consciousness in the field, in the FLFE is 560 on the Hawkins map on properties. And now you can adjust it yourself up to 570. And there's a 600 boost as well. Yeah, people find that, and I found it myself in my own work, that it just provides like a bottom, you know, like a baseline to start from, almost like a trampoline. You know, you can go lower and it tends to bring you back up faster. And the energy's there for the body to use to rewire, to, you know, to reconfigure as well as heal.
I think that brings up another point. I have a lot of questions and a lot of comments, but the whole issue of looking at spiritual practices or tools and perhaps mistaking them for a magic bullet, because there is no magic bullet on the journey, right? There's before enlightenment, cutting wood and carrying water, and after enlightenment, cutting wood and carrying water. And so sometimes I think it's our human tendency to want to look for that magic bullet that'll make all our problems go away. And FLFE is not an insurance policy against life, right? The FLFE field provides us with that undergirding of support in which we can do our work more effectively and then evolve perhaps more graciously, perhaps more fluidly, right? But it doesn't absolve us of the responsibility to do our own work.
Not yet. That's what we always joke about in the office. Oh, we should write a program for that. Well, yeah, we're working on it, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's...
well, it's our human condition. We always look for the easy way out first, right?
Yeah, it's just human nature. We... in some ways it's looking for the easy way, but in other ways, humans are so adaptable. We're so resourceful. We're so malleable that we naturally move towards the easiest way to do things. And, you know, that's not a bad thing. It's just, that's the nature of our species, is the most dominant species on the planet, for better or for worse. And we're just optimizing things all the time. We don't think about ourselves that way very often, but we are. Humans are extraordinary, and we're always looking to find the easiest way to get what we want. And when you have, sometimes when you turn FLFE on for the first time, the amount of momentum that it gives you and the level of experience that you have without really doing anything else, you wonder what's possible. At least, you know, I do, and other people do. And you think, well, you know, maybe it can do this for me. And really what it's doing is just providing you an opportunity to see the better side of yourself. And there are a lot of properties on the planet and a lot of places that are really low. And it takes a lot of energy from us to compensate to live there. I mean, if you've been on an old battlefield, you know, just walking around, or in an abandoned prison or something, or if you spend some time there, it's like you start to not be your best self. Environment eventually is more powerful than will. It wears you down. And so if you've been in a low environment now I'm not saying it isn't possible to overcome that if you can get really conscious about it. But if you've been in the low environment for a long time and all of a sudden that environment is cleaned up and you don't have to give all your energy away, you start to wonder what's possible for yourself, because you're still putting out 100 units of energy, but you're getting back 200 units of result. And so there's a natural curiosity as to how good it can be with just what I've been doing.
And I
so
think that's
the
a beautiful concept there, because you bring up this whole area, the environment will actually prevail over time, right? And so therefore it becomes really important for us to select an environment that is going to be conducive, supportive of our unfolding. And that reminded me of Hawkins' research. It showed that one individual operating at the level of consciousness of 500 in the field counterbalances 750,000 individuals below 200. So that because of that logarithmic scale, there's so much hope, there's so much potential, because we can hold the intention and the energy for that higher field that will, as it were, anchor a portal to that field in the collective, right? Instead of capitulating to the lowest common denominator and just thinking that that which is seen on the surface by numbers is going to be more powerful. Because you guys talk about having the equivalent of all these Buddhist monks praying for one, right?
Yes, if you do the math and you take, and if you assume the average Buddhist monk is 500 over that 24-hour period, and you figure out how many Buddhist monks it would take to take an environment that starts at 420 to 560, then there's an equivalent there. It's just a math issue at that point. And it's, and then you have that's 24/7. So you have to have 3 shifts of monks praying 8 hours a day. That's the assumption. Then you have to have people to pray, feed the monks and take care of the monks, and they have to, so they have a life. So that's a lot of monks. Even if they're low maintenance, they gotta still have to eat.
My granny used to tell me when I left home, she said to me, "My girlie, I never worry about you because I have prayed a mountain of prayer for you."
Wow.
And many times in my life, when I would be in very difficult places, I would remember that and take hope. And I think having this concept of the monks praying for us, or having this concept of the counterbalancing effect of high energy, is so encouraging. It's very helpful when we feel as if we're in a very dark place and very alone. So,
that's a nice thought. I imagine your grandmother clearing the path for you your whole life as she was praying for you, just like.
I am sure she did.
Yeah.
She didn't know where I would go and what I would do because she passed earlier on, but she had a vision, and she had the wisdom to share it with me, because it has been such a wonderful thing all through my life. And I think we sometimes forget to tell people these positive things, how we see their light or how we see the potential when we have the opportunity. So that brings us to Focus Life Force Energy, because we're talking here about the evolution of consciousness, and I get so excited about it because we are so blessed to live at this time on the planet where we have resources, we have technology, and we have the ability and we have the will to awaken more so than any generation before us on this planet. And so Focus Life Force Energy is right here in the midst of this evolution. So tell me more about it. Tell me how it works. Tell me where it fits in.
I could start. Yeah, as we've said, we're activating a field. FLFE is activating a field of consciousness. But how does that happen? So it's very much like human consciousness. So when I mentioned visiting the inventor, seeing these stacks, what it was doing was input stacks were bringing in life force energy into this device and focusing it in a particular place and creating this very high field, this very high consciousness place. And that space, we discovered through time, Clayten discovered with the inventor, and we took it further, there's a quantum field, there's a quantum effect between that space and anywhere else, as long as there's a unique identifier for that place. Now in FLFE, we use legal address or coordinates. So this highly energetic space, what we discovered is this quantum connection is instant. The energy is there. It's just activated in that place. And originally, there, in the very early parts of the machine, the inventor was using water that was charged up by the machine for arthritis. And the water would lose its charge over, a relatively short period of time. Well, if you took a granite plate or a marble plate and you charged it up and you shipped it to Germany or wherever, well, then it would recharge the water for a longer period of time, but eventually it would lose its charge. But if you put a photo of the plate, it would maintain its charge indefinitely because there's a constant quantum connection. And so FLFE works that way by really what we're doing literally is putting in the field instructions to divinity. And they're acted upon, and through kinesiology and other means of measuring that, we've now worked with ION's Institute of Noetic Sciences, and they've seen our activated fields in different ways. So that connection or that quantum resonance between these is the basis of FLFE. So we're activating the field, and it really works like human consciousness. So if you're thinking of someone like, say, a sibling, say a brother, you're thinking of that person, we believe there's a field activated around them. And so when we experience you think of someone and then they call you on the phone, that they've thought of you, they've activated a field, you're now feeling that connection, you think of them while they're dialing. So FLFE works in just the same way.
So it's like entanglement in quantum physics then, and in FLFE, because of the intention then creates that connection so that there can be this quantum entanglement.
So in this field, we're now putting what we call programs, which are written instructions or requests of divinity that then specify what happens in the field.
Excellent. And so these instructions, from the way I know how you work, Clayten, is that this is going to be tested every which way to Sunday, so that you will come up with the particular instruction that muscle tests up for you is the highest vibration frequency, right? The highest level of consciousness.
Yeah, the programs, they calibrate at 999 out of 1,000 or higher.
Okay.
So that it's a very high level of truth. And what we do is we write a context out, Ada. So which is basically truth is always in a context. So we write out the intention of the program. So one of our programs, the first one we really worked on, was the removal template. And that is to remove all of the negative energy from a piece of land that we can remove with the technology. So that would be part of the context. We might get more clear about that, about how we want it to happen. And then we write out the request to divinity, and we have to write it out in such a way that it is highly truthful in what we're trying to achieve. And we write it and we rewrite it, and we take words out and put words in, and in that process in particular, we had to identify every negative condition or every negative, action that could happen on the land that would create a condition. So it took us weeks of writing out negative actions. It was a really dark couple of weeks, especially near the end. It was getting really into the lowest aspect that humans can create, Yeah. And then we wrote a request to divinity to remove that, and we wrote it in a very accurate way. And so that's it's a labor of love. It's very time consuming, very laborious. And once you have a really good program written, though, it's like art. I gotta swear, it's just like art. You read it, you just feel good reading it, eh, Jeff? It's like you read this, go, I just feel good reading this. So it's like Hawkins' books. They're like really high, And even when you're talking about these dark things, it's like, you read those programs and it's like, that's a nice piece of writing.
And when you have this field around you supporting you, then clearly there is all of the support for the evolution in consciousness. Now every individual is going to be able to use their own tools, right? Their favorite tools, whether it's prayer or meditation within that field, to make use of it, right?
It's like a pristine environment. You could say it's like a sanctuary environment where we can roll back some of those, negative aspects of the, positive technologies around us that help us every day. So we have the EMF mitigation, and this bubble of positivity is just pristine in a way, and we can be ourselves in a way without other influences. Like in a piece of property where something has occurred, say it's a murder or just, a bad fight in a divorce or some kind of negative interaction, that's there, in the memory of the crystalline structures. And it might be, say, an obsessive thought pattern that someone had. So those thoughts they're affecting us. And we don't even realize it, like that it's not our thoughts. And that feeling of heaviness and depression is not our feeling, but it's there. And so that creating that pristine environment is just free from those influences to allow us to be ourselves and to work our own tools, as you said, for our own evolution in our own way.
Yeah. Which is beautiful, because in psychology there is a field of research that is now looking at how trauma is carried forward generationally for at least 3 generations. The grandmother already has within her cells, the cells that will become the grandchildren that will carry those imprints. And by having this field around us, we're able to clear these things, not just for us, but for our ancestors, for our children, because we know in the field it's not linear. We navigate with the intention, with the energy, and so we can clear it throughout all timelines. It's beautiful. So tell me a little bit more about the programs. Some of the programs that you have 3 different formats: home and business, and well, you also have cell phones or objects.
Yeah, so we have the different products. So there's a property product, the home and business. And so if someone comes on and does a free trial, they're doing a home free trial, which is property. And then we have a product for cell phones, which uses the unique identifier of the cellular number and the country that it's in to identify that object. And then we also have an object subscription, which is a photograph, much like the picture of the marble that was used to charge the water. Yeah. It's a photograph of, a pendant or something else, high resolution in a way that you can see the little nicks and scratches and flaws in the way it was manufactured. So there's an everywhere, which we call FLFE everywhere, which is the phone and the object. So it's somewhat different. You're not clearing the land like you are on a property, because you might be on a plane, going 700 miles an hour, or on a high-speed train, and you're trying to clear and just use so much energy. So we do have limits to the amount of energy available. So, but it's creating a bubble. So it's almost like it's flowing, like if you're a deep sea diver and you've got those old suits, where you got the big heavy helmet and the air's coming in. It's like you've got this high consciousness energy kind of flowing in and into this bubble around you. And then within 4 feet, there's EMF mitigation, which we can get more into. But within that 4 feet are all the other programs, like brain optimization, like the GI tract optimization, and now this energized nutrients, fairly new, liver and kidney support, grounding. There's all sorts of other programs that we've developed that are in that 4-foot bubble for the FLFE everywhere. But then in the property subscriptions, you've got those in the whole property all the way up to the boundaries, the legal boundaries of the property.
And so each of the subscriptions contains a full spectrum of programs that you have created within the constraints of that delivery system. And that is wonderful. It feels as if perhaps we can talk about EMFs a little bit, because it is such a big issue, emerging issue in our world, and then also touch base on the brain optimization and the gut optimization programs. If you could give us some more information on that, you're going to bounce the ball.
So I'll start off with the EMFs. We had a lot of our customers asking about electromagnetic frequencies and how FLFE influenced that. And as we were looking into that topic, we found that when we test the properties 3 times a week. So when new people come on, we test, usually within 72 hours, we'll test the property to make sure it's at the level. And once a week, we test all the properties. We do it in batch testing. And what we found was that there were some properties that were not at level. They weren't at 560, 98% of the time or higher. We have lots of properties at 590, 600. We found that some properties weren't at level. And so we were calling these people and finding out what was going on in their neighborhood. And they said, we started to notice a pattern where they were saying, well, we just had a new cell tower put in across the street. We just had a smart meter put in the house. And it was dropping the level of consciousness of the properties. And so we made a distinction in this process of looking at the difference between consciousness lowering electromagnetic frequencies and consciousness neutral or consciousness raising. I mean, we're emitting electromagnetic frequencies right now, and we're having a nice conversation. So I'd say it's a positive electromagnetic frequency, right? And some are just neutral and some are negative. And not all devices are designed to really measure the subtle energies. Like the tri-field meter, it won't pick up the influence of FLFE, but the gas discharge visualization meter will. So, or camera. So what we found in our research was that if we raise the level of consciousness of the emitter on your cell phone to 580, it would make the electromagnetic frequencies coming out of the cell phone positive. That was a big discovery.
That's amazing, because instead of resisting, which so much of the anti-EMF movement is done, what we resist will persist. So what you're doing is you go with the flow of that energy in order to direct it and actually lift it up to a higher level. Amazing.
Yeah, that was a big, and then so what we do is every device in the home, for example, or if you have a mobile subscription, we'll start with the home. Every device in the home that emanates a consciousness lowering electromagnetic frequency, that device will go to at least 580. So then, so the home actually goes up about 4 more points when the EMF program goes on, because even the router, your Wi-Fi router, will go up to 600 typically, because there's so much negativity coming out of it. The positivity just.
I love that.
Yeah. So the router becomes a meditation zone.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm sure that animals can see that. Animals tell, because I know that my pets have been gravitating closer and closer to the FLFE field, you know, and wildlife coming right close to the house. They want to be as close as possible to the epicenter of that field. And that's a beautiful thing, because it benefits not just the humans, but all forms of life, right?
There's a great example of that on our website in the EMF mitigation section. Cosmo, the dog of some friends of ours, just started, as soon as they put on FLFE with the EMF mitigation, the dog started sleeping on the router. So there's a picture of Cosmo curled up against the Wi-Fi router in that page.
Goodness.
So the, you know, the animals are feeling that. And we did a survey, which is also on that page, when we first launched the beta test of the EMF mitigation, and we had a number of people that have been asking us for it, sensitives, and when it went on, the feedback that we got, and there's comments that are there on the website and also there, the data, people were seeing, you know, much better sleep, less anxiety. Seems like that the amount of anxiety in our society and people today, it may be related to the EMFs, because people were feeling much less anxiety, much less tension. And I feel it that way too when I turn it on and off to experiment using our control panel, which everybody has. It's fun. You could turn it on and off and try things. That I feel my shoulders kind of coming up when, and then when I turn the EMF back on, it's like they start to relax.
Yeah.
So, yeah, as Clayton said, within the property, all the devices are now self-regulating in consciousness to harmonize the output of EMFs.
And
So
with the individual panel, every individual can experiment with that and turn it off and notice the difference and turn it back on.
That's right. Yeah, we wanted to give everyone the chance to be their own researcher. So you can turn FLFE on and off. You can turn the EMF mitigation on and off. And now we have a slider. You can slide the level of support up to 570 or down to 400 on the Hawkins map. So it doesn't mean the property will go down there, but it means the level of support. It won't, you know, we're supporting it to not go below that level. And then we have the boost.
And that is really wonderful, because one of my more difficult lessons in my work early on was learning that not everybody, just because a high energy field feels good to you and me, not everybody necessarily is going to enjoy that. It might be literally painful to somebody who's not accustomed to that field. And so it might be more helpful for them to have it at a lower level until the neurological system can catch up.
Yeah, it really comes back to the nervous system.
Yes. So that brings us to the brain optimization. Who's going to take the ball? Clayton, you're going to run with this one?
Well, I'll start with it. Before I forget about the EMF, we also found that shungite, we put the energetic signature of shungite into the environment, and it harmonizes all of the other conscious slowing electromagnetic frequencies coming in, like we call electronic smog.
Oh,
like
yes.
Cell phone towers, radio towers, microwaves.
And dirty electricity.
All that stuff. Anything that's going to lower the consciousness, it will harmonize it all. And
you guys are making available such an incredible service. Just even with this component, people spend thousands of dollars building EMF shields in their bedrooms and trying to deal with it in that way. And here's the solution right there.
Yeah.
Shungite shungite's the key. Part of the key for sure.
Shungite is wonderful. Yes.
It's the only material we found that actually, if you put shungite on the outside of a smart meter, for example, you can try and experiment. I haven't done this, but I have friends who have. They have a smart meter, and they put plants in a room with a smart meter, and the plants would grow away from the smart meter and shrivel. They put enough shungite on the outside of the smart meter, and the plants started growing up and towards the smart meter, because it takes the negative energy and makes it positive.
Yeah. Oh, that is amazing. So tell me about the brain optimization program.
So I could start, and then I'll hand it off to you, Clayton. So with FLFE, again, we're activating a field. There's high levels of positive energy, of high consciousness, lots of life force energy, chi, prana. And so we can also add to those instructions in the programs where to focus that life force energy. So we know through Chinese medicine that flow of qi through the body is really important for healing and for functioning of our organs, including our brain. So that brain optimization, what we saw was when we brought on the EMF, that our brains had been taxed and really, working hard to overcome the effect of the EMFs. And so we knew that we needed to support our brains to optimize and be their best.
Mhm.
And so that program is basically we ask it to go to where it's most needed in the brain. Additional life force energy, additional chi.
Okay.
So the places in the brain where there's repairing going on,
Mhm.
or where the brain is really working hard and it's really focused, and it's using up that chi as well as the other nutrients, that
Mhm.
we're flowing more of that chi into that location.
Okay.
You know,
That is
and
amazing.
so it's really that simple. It goes where it's most needed in the brain.
Okay. And the body in its own infinite wisdom knows how to use life force energy to heal. I'm not a neurologist, but I knew after I had the accident last year and my brain was injured and I had internal bleeding, and I just asked for the life force energy to go where it needed to go.
Mhm.
And allow the energies to flow and to do the healing and repair that needed to happen. And that infinite wisdom of the life force energy and consciousness together, I think, is very effective. And then there is that connection from the brain to the gut, because the gut is also known as a second brain, because the enteric nervous system in the gut is so important. It actually is bigger than the nervous system that we find in the brain. And so when we have inflammation in the gut, we're going to have a leaky brain. We're going to have inflammation there. And if we have inflammation in the brain, we're going to have a leaky gut issue. And so by you addressing both these pieces together, you really bring the complete package together. So tell me more about how you wrapped the gut, the food optimization programs together.
Well, we'll start with the food optimization. So we had a program on FLFE years ago where we would energize the food as soon as it touched the saliva of the person eating it, if they were in an FLFE environment. And that actually, at that time, it took an extremely large amount of energy from the machine. I mean, we do a lot of upgrades, but it took a lot of energy. And because digestion is the most energy consuming process of the body,
Yes.
we did notice that people had more resources energetically. You want to call it that, just more energy. They didn't have to spend so much of it digesting the food. And so the body can use that extra energy to do the things that the body knows how to do. We don't have to tell it how to heal. It knows how to heal. With the GI tract optimization and the food energization recently, what we found out was that if we send that request to divinity to enhance the bioavailability of the essential fatty acids in the food and the magnesium and the vitamin D, if we did each individual nutrient, there was a significant uptake in the nutrients as they were requested to be increased in energy through the technology. And so what we also did with the GI tract is we would energize the different parts of the GI tract. Like there's lots of research out there that says this particular type of probiotic is most active in the ascending colon. This particular type of probiotic is most active in this. And there's very detailed understanding of how the GI tract works. So we took the best medical science we could find, cross-referencing, peer-reviewed medical journals, testing the level of consciousness, and we would energize those aspects of the GI tract as the food was moving through them, so that when those lactobacillus had to do their job in a part of the small or large intestine, that they had a little more energy to do their job. And we would make requests to divinity to reduce the porosity of the colon, to hold in suspension any toxins in the food so that they didn't irritate the colon. And we would request that they're held in a certain way, which is all covered in different medical journals.
So you don't have the problem with reabsorption, because that's always the problem in the colon.
You diminish it as much as you can. You make the request, and as we learn more and more about how to make the request, just it works better. But so just adding a lot of energy helps, and then making this prayer more specific is, add another level specificity and a level of results. And so we would, for example, we used a lot of the work of Dr. Daniel Amen, who's a brain expert. Yeah, and he's out of Vancouver, BC, Canada. So because we can test the level of consciousness of the doctor, test the level of consciousness of their work, and then test the level of appropriateness to increase the program. So it takes time, but if you spend the time at it, you can do it.
Yeah. So you do glean, I mean, you're curating the best of the best here in bringing these programs together. And it probably is indeed like a piece of art. It's a work in progress that is being adapted and changed and adjusted as the learning goes. I mean, even in the medical field, the learning expands and things need to be adjusted continuously, right?
Yeah, it definitely is a work of art in progress. And the body's innate intelligence is the king, and the queen. I mean, it is what is really directing everything. And so that innate intelligence, we're just giving it all the support we can.
Yes,
and the more specific the support, it seems the better that it can operate with that.
Okay. Well, this is wonderful. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but you do touch on some of the supplements that is necessary if we wish to thrive in a high consciousness field. So perhaps you can just run through those again, starting with water, so that we have a list of those supplements. It's a lot less than I think most people would take. It becomes very efficient when you have focus life force energies.
Well, certainly water. I could just start with that one. That's some, good quality water with minerals in it is just so essential to all the healing processes, to our evolution. To be able to flush out those byproducts of our evolution, keeps the liver and kidneys healthy. So we have a hydration section on the website. We recommend a higher level of hydration in the very beginning of FLFE. Because there's just more healing going on. As the body now has a blank check to do all these renovations, there's a lot of debris that's got to go out into the dumpster. So you need water to carry it out. So I'll let you carry on with the other ones, Clayton.
Yeah, so once you're well hydrated, and that's not an easy thing in our society. We have a chronically dehydrated world. And so it's about half the body weight in ounces is what we suggest. So if you're 150 pounds, 75 ounces a day. And I struggle with that at times when I get preoccupied. The next thing is, because in a high consciousness field, our level of consciousness goes up and our nervous system is required to carry more light. And the food of the nervous system is essential fatty acids and magnesium. And if they're taken within 30 minutes of each other, it creates a synergy. So it amplifies the positive effect of those. So that would be probably the next supplement that we would suggest.
Now, let me ask you a question here. There are 10 known types of magnesium. Does it matter which types? Can individuals take the ones that resonate for them, or that they know that is going to serve a need for them?
Yeah, a lot of people ask which product we recommend, and we're not so much into recommending products. Magnesium threonate is basically the best one that we found. And in fact, I just was up shopping today and I picked up some more magnesium. I'm using magnesium biglycinate right now. This is the one that I'm using. I take 1 or 2 of those a day. But basically, we suggest people just muscle test. So you hold the container in front of you and you say the food inside this capsule is good for my body. You'll move towards it. Then you can scale out on a scale of 1 to 100 and compare different products. So if you can find someone to help you with testing, that is a real benefit.
There's a few more, right? D2?
Well, vitamin D, yeah. So that was the next one. So as we started this journey, we were water. Then we realized the nervous system piece. And then we noticed that vitamin D levels were the next sort of critical factor for people in a high consciousness field. because it's such a universal vitamin for all sorts of healing processes in the body. So, and that could be taken with vitamin K to help with absorption, but of course with our energized nutrients, that's helping the absorption. So vitamin D is definitely another one, and getting in sunlight's really the best way, because there's so many hormonal things that are occurring when you do that. And then zinc has turned up as one of the next limiting factors, to have enough zinc. And then getting zinc in an absorbable form is also important, like it's in a chelated form.
Excellent. Oh, this was wonderful. I have many more questions, but I think there's going to be enough for today. I appreciate your time, and I really appreciate you answering all of these questions. Is there anything last minute that you would like to share or add?
Well, maybe say a few words to give you the closing word, Jeff. In all of our programs, the last sentence is, it says that everything here must be done in the highest and best interest of all creation. So to have a highly truthful program, if you will, in the context of what we were talking about earlier, you have to turn it over to divinity to use its own guidance system. As much as the mind can use kinesiology or other tools to measure truth and specify truth, without turning it over to God and or divinity and letting it guide the process of evolution, you can't have a 999 truth or higher. It doesn't work that way. So I just thought I'd say that, we're good at kinesiologists. We work pretty hard. We're reasonably diligent, but we keep turning it over to a higher power and ask for help. And that's one of the things I like most about doing business with Jeff and the rest of the team is, that's just how we live now. We get to show up at work and not have to leave that behind. We just take it right into the office, and it's a great life.
I think it's a beautiful thing, because that's really where everything ends and begins. We do our best and we give to the Creator Spirit the rest. We have to let go of our attachment to the outcomes, and then it can come back in ways that we could not even have fathomed. And that's the exciting part of the journey, isn't it? Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate that. And I look forward to seeing some beautiful things coming out of FLFE here as we continue forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rita.
Good night.